Hi everybody, welcome to this week's video. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you how to plan writing your book from start to first draft. What I'm going to start, before I dive into the content, I'm going to share a little bit about what having a plan is, what it's not, and then also sharing with you some of the benefits of having a plan. And this is a plan that I use myself when I'm writing my book. So I just want to clarify that. I know everybody has their own process, but this is specifically the plan that I use. So first of all, what it is. This is basically, it's garnered from a checklist that I use that kind of helps me guide through the process, and it's in 4 stages: plan, build, write, and edit. So those are the 4 stages that I use, and within that I break down each area and all the steps that I need to do as I'm writing my book, or as I'm planning my book. So that's what it is. It's a plan to help me through the process. What it's not really something that is stagnant, that doesn't allow me to be flexible or creative, because I like the structure, but I also, flexibility is really important to me. And I think, like outlining, that's something that some writers struggle with, and they think, oh, well, it's too structured, it's not really for me. And I just like to emphasize that I like both and both really work well for me. So the benefits. I think for me, there's 3 main benefits. The first is that it really helps me to get clear about the book that I'm, identifying what I'm going to write, how long it's actually going to take me to write it. Now that's not specific, it's just estimated. And then it also helps me to build a strong foundation before I start writing, so that I'm not sort of floundering without any guidelines or deadlines as well too. The other benefit is it really helps me to have confidence, because sometimes when we're in the throes and we're writing the books and we're coming across all of our fears and all the blocks that come up when we're trying to write, whether that's with things that are, within ourselves or things that happen around us that prevent us or create obstacles, basically. So when I have the plan, it really helps me to have the confidence, because, hey, I know that, okay, when these obstacles come up, I have a plan of how to manage them. So it really takes away some, obviously not all, the fears, and it helps me to continue going through the process of writing my book from start to finish. So let's dive into the first part of my plan, which is, I should say the checklist that I use, and that is plan. And what that looks like, that's basically just the story basics, the story that I'm going to write, what's the idea of the story, the premise of the story, a little bit about what the story is. And I also identify, obviously, a book title if I have one, a tentative one. And then I also have an area for release date. Now, I actually don't always fill this in until I've kind of mapped out the dates of each phase that I use. And that really helps me to say, okay, have an idea of how long it's going to take. But roughly, it's about anywhere between 4 to 6 months for me is the norm. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's longer, but I usually try to stick within that time frame. Works for me. So, and some other components is also getting my what I like to call my mindset prep. And that's really just identifying any challenges that I'm having, that could possibly create issues for me at that point that I'm trying to write the book. Because let's face it, life and things and who we are and where we are in our lives and our growth as well too can affect us when we're writing our book or trying to write a book. So I kind of do a little mindset prep, and that really helps me, and that's part of my planning. The next thing I look at is my writing schedule, and what that is sort of, okay, when do I see the days and times that I'm going to write? Does that work with my life? Doesn't it work with my life? And just sort of really being clear about that before I even just dive in there and start. Because I find what happens with me is when I just dive in and start without having a plan, I write very sporadically, and then it takes me even longer to finish, or I haven't really looked and said, okay, is this a good time? Are these good dates? for me to write. So having that and looking at that as part of my planning stage is really important. The next thing I do is I plan and think about my accountability. And that's actually in two parts. That's who am I going to have accountable to help me with meeting my milestones and my deadlines. And then as well as, okay, how am I going to, who's going to be my accountability for when I'm actually needing to write and meet my writing times. So sometimes it's the same person, but often than not, it's different. And I've tend to separate them because I found that just makes it easier, because it's really difficult to find somebody who sort of fits both of those roles. Sometimes it's not necessarily a person. Sometimes I will create accountability around Camp Nano or National Novel Writing Month or other writing sprints, things like that I participate or I create for myself with other people. So it doesn't have to be one thing or another. I like to look at different options that work for me at whatever time that I'm actually working on the book, and that seems to fit me pretty well so far. The next phase is build your story Bible, and that's it's build, but I extend it. And what this story Bible is, some people use it, some people don't. It's basically a very detailed outline of my book. And I have I think it's a 7-page document that has a list of specific questions that guide me through writing my book, or I should say outlining my book. And how that breaks down, and I'm just gonna summarize it because otherwise this video is gonna be really, really long. Within my story Bible, I've got the first part is my story basics, which I put in as part of my planning, and the next part is my 1-page summary, which is basically everything that I know about the story, what's going to happen, a 1-page summary. If I know that. If I don't, then obviously it's what I was saying earlier about flexibility. If I don't, then I just move on. I don't stress about it or feel that I have to fill that in before I can move on. I like that flexibility because let's face it, every time we write a book, it's not always the same process. There's a lot of writers that are able to do that. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them with everything. So I make sure to maximize what's working for me. The next thing within my story Bible is I create my character sketches, as well as I build out my settings, or for those of you who are fantasy writers, your world. I've included parts about world in there because I find, to be honest, I built it in there for clients who were doing writing fantasy. So I put that in there for them, and I just decided to keep it for myself because I found there were some elements of it that I liked, the questions, that were really helpful with me when I was creating settings and creating, in a sense, the world in which my book was going to be set. So there's that portion. Map out my scenes and my characters. And how I do that is this is where my 1-page summary comes into play, and then I just look at, okay, what are the scenes and the settings and what's going to happen, and some kind of sequential order as stated, as much as I can and as much as I know. And this just helps me with the flow of the story so that I have that for when I start writing the book. That helps me to get going, and then I can fill in the gaps, because obviously there's going to be things that happen, characters change, places change, the arc of, the overall story might change, but this is something that is, to me, works as a roadmap so that it keeps me from getting stuck, or I still get stuck sometimes in the middle, who doesn't? But it really helps me to find my way out of the middle, let's just put it that way, when I have this, my scenes and my chapters mapped out. I also like to add things, what I call book stuff. And this is any research that I know that I need to do. And why I like to add this as part of my outlining phase is because it allows me to kind of do some of the research ahead of time, but not while I'm writing, so that it doesn't interrupt the flow of my writing. Because let's face it, there's going to be research that you don't anticipate that is going to happen while you're writing. So as much as I can reduce that, I find that that really is helpful for me. And it also helps me to keep a list of what are all the things that I need to research, that I anticipate having to research as I'm writing the story, so that I can do that work ahead of time. The other thing is interviews. I found with some of my books, like I had to interview people who were actually doing that. Like, for instance, I interviewed the previous police commissioner because I wanted to get an understanding of how the police worked and what I was talking about in the scenes and everything. I wanted it to be realistic because I was writing about my hometown. So I didn't want to do it based on TV or what I thought it could be, or just generic, because I knew that it was going to be slightly different for each town, each area. And yes, there are set ground laws, but there's procedural things that vary. And I really wanted to get that right, because I have friends who are police officers as well too that live in my hometown, or I should say on the island where I grew up. So I really wanted that to be very authentic. So I interviewed police officers. When I did my book about a female race car driver, I interviewed people that I knew who had raced cars on the island and what that experience was like, because it's not like a big track in the States. It's a small track on the island. And I really wanted to try to get that feeling, as well as I'd never raced a car before. I wanted to get an idea of what does it feel like physically, so that I could describe it. So that's where my interviews came into play. That I like having those so that I know who I need to interview. And I also keep some of my interview notes in there that I know that are going to be important to the story. And like I said, I have a lot of that information beforehand as much as possible, so that it doesn't delay the process as I'm writing the book. Trying to think of an example, but to be honest, I couldn't think of anything. But it would be like, because sometimes when I read through the summary and you read through the chapters, you think, this might be a possible story issue or a conflict that I have to think about as I'm writing, how I'm going to resolve it. So I like to, if I know of any, I like to write that out ahead of time so I can kind of brainstorm it and think about ways to work through it so that I don't get stuck when I'm writing that portion of the book. I don't really have any milestones per se, but I kind of like to have a date. Okay, when am I gonna do the final Bible review? Because at some point I need to cut it off, because let's face it, we could be working on our story Bible and our outline forever. But I do like that flexibility. That's another thing I like with this format of my story Bible, is that it allows me to add as I'm writing the book as well too. So it's not like a stagnant workbook where I'm having to add pages. I tried that didn't work for me, but I really liked because it's just a Word document, so I can expand in areas where I need to add without having to worry about it. All of that information in one place, because I found that as I was writing and trying to keep track of this stuff, I was just like, what's that character's name again? And I'd have to be searching through to remember, whereas I can go to my story Bible. It's a lot easier to search through a 20-page document than like a 200-page book. So that's also a benefit of having the story Bible as well too, at least for me. But I like to have a cutoff date as far as that it fits into a timeline or a deadline if I've set one for myself as well too. So the next phase is write. Now, I try to keep this part as simple as possible. What it basically looks like is writing the beginning to the middle, the middle. It needs its own section because I always struggle with that portion. And then from middle to end. And I just set tentative dates on when I want to reach each one of those areas that kind of tie in with my deadline and how much time I want to give myself. And the reason why I like to look at dates, everybody does it slightly different. Sometimes I use I want to take this many days and then I map out the date. Sometimes I just set a specific date. If I have a deadline in mind, or if I have to work around an editor's schedule, because they tend to book months in advance. So I do it both ways. It kind of depends. The last thing that I do in the right stage is that I set those milestones. Sometimes I'll add a little bit more things as far as what the milestones are. Like I want to, finish the first 5 chapters or something like that. Or I sometimes use the 3-act arc. But mostly I just sort of use beginning, middle, and end to help me as far as the writing stage. And I just try to keep that part simple because to me that's the most difficult or time consuming. So that just gets me going and gets me started. And of course, I've already got my writing schedule. I know when I'm going to start writing, so I can jump in and get started right away. So that's one of the reasons why I like to set a writing schedule ahead of time. That really helps me when I'm very focused on writing a book. The next stage is everybody's favorite, and I'm saying that sarcastically, of course, is editing. And I think editing, it's depending on the book, but the way that I find that works for me is I start with a 4-phase editing process. And I do use another checklist. As you can tell, I love checklists. And it's a editing checklist that helps me to work through the 4 phases. I call them 4 phases of editing my book once it's finished. I don't remember all the phases off the top of my head because it's a pretty long checklist. I think it's like probably about 10 pages. But anyway, so basically in each phase, it breaks down all the things that I want to look at when I'm editing the book. And there are other things that I do outside of that checklist, but I find that that really helps me to stay focused and not get so overwhelmed when I'm editing, because let's face it, it's sometimes not the most fun part of the book. And within that editing checklist, those phases, I also include beta readers as well as professional editors, because I think that those are an important part of editing that I think sometimes get forgotten because we think, okay, we've edited the book, now we're done, it's good, it's ready to go. When the truth is, I think it's important to get feedback from beta readers and professional editors before you publish or before you plan to pitch to an editor. Because trust me, even with all of that, there's still going to be more editing. There's always more editing and then more editing and more editing. So as much as you can get done, it's always better. I find it gets for a cleaner story, and it really does, as much as there is more editing, it really does save time on the editing. All right, and like I said, that 4-phase editing it really helps me. And if you would like to get that resource for yourself, it is a free resource as part of my ultimate checklist bundle. That it's free. I'll leave the link below so that you can check it out for yourself. And it has a different checklist, but the editing checklist is in there as well too. That is my process for writing the book from start to end. Now, I just want to reiterate that, this is my process and this works for me the best. I've been tweaking this for probably the last 10 years. And I always encourage writers to find their own process, as well as recognize that it is an ongoing process, because let's face it, we change during our writing career, and as we're growing as writers, our process change, and that it's okay to tweak and change along with it, and don't feel that you have to stay with this is what you have to stay with, because even with this process, there are little things that I tweak here and there along the way, or I choose not, now I don't need it for this book, and it's okay to have that flexibility. It's really important, especially if you're a pantser. And I actually do have a different process that I use for clients who are pantsters, but I don't even know where that is, to be honest. But if I find it, I will make sure to post it, because I know pantsters tend to be, they prefer to dive right in. Oh, I think it's just it's not a process. It's very simple. I just recommend choosing your writing times, days and times, and your 1-page summary, and that's it. Then you get to dive right in and get started writing. because like I said, and sometimes, you know what, I do that as well too, but I just have the story Bible as a backup so that I can fill in information as I go, because I just learned the hard way. If I don't have that, I'm going to waste so much time and pull my hair out. That works for me. Some pastors, they don't need it. They got their one-page summary. They dive right in, and that works great too. So it's really about finding what works for you. So I hope you'll check out that free resource if you think you could use it. Oh, leave any questions that you have about the process of writing your book from start to finish in the comments, and I would love to answer them for you. Or share your own process. I love that too. Like and subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.